Many of my brothers and sisters are arrested, put in prison, and even facing charges of long imprisonment and death. I can't just remain silent and resort to prayer, which is a powerful mean to change, to bring about change, but not the only option. So to couple that prayer with some action, we started an initiative that turned out to be an organization. It grew not by design, but by default.
Welcome to the Unconventional Ministry Podcast. I'm Dennis Weens, your host, the Senior Impact Catalyst at Sat7 USA. My guest today grew up in Iran as an unbeliever, but after hearing the gospel, he gave his life to Christ. As a young Christian under a hostile government, he saw the fallout of persecution decades ago. Since that time, he has sought to train up and champion Christians inside Iran. So I want to welcome Mansour Borji, the founder and CEO of Article18. He's also a Sat7 PARS board member and presently the chairman of the Sat7 PARS satellite TV channel board. So welcome, Mansour, to the Unconventional Ministry Podcast.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for having me. And let me just say hello to all the listeners and those who follow your podcast. Great to be here. It's a great honor.
I've looked forward to this conversation for some time now. Article 18 is a nonprofit organization based in London. You're the founder, CEO. We want to learn all about it. I want to start with the state of the church in your country of Iran. We hear a lot about Iran in the news, of course. We don't hear that much about the church. So for our podcast listeners, what is the state of the church in Iran? And then we'll expand our conversation to what you're doing for the church there.
Sure, that's a golden question, and everybody asks. But you are, depending on who you ask this, you get a different response. So the majority of the journalists, politicians, as well as church and ministry leaders are interested in the answer to this question. You ask the evangelicals, they seem to respond as if there is nobody else exists except the evangelicals. You ask the traditional churches, you would get a response as if they're not acknowledging the growing massive number of Persian-speaking Christians, which are majority converts from other faiths, including Islam, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism, to Christianity, which makes up the majority of the Christian population at the moment. By some research, they claim that 1.9% growth of the evangelical church in Iran puts it at number one country in terms of its evangelical population growth. But then it's contrasted with another view that the Iranian government would like to present to the world, that there are churches that they're open to its Christian population, mainly ethnic Christians from Armenian or Assyrian descent. So they have their own languages, their own script. So the message of the church remains contained to these churches, and that's what the Iranian government would like from it impacting the general population. And as soon as these churches have Bibles or have services in Persian language, which is a national language, then they have problems with. I'm sure many of your listeners know that there are many different languages spoken in Iran, but Farsi is the one that ties everyone together. That's the national language. And therefore, there are still some churches remaining in the country. Before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, nearly 45 years ago, there were about 300,000 Christians from Armenian and Assyrian descent. But now that number is reduced to less than 100,000, despite the fact that the population has increased probably 2 or 3 times, 2.5 times. But many of them have immigrated, and therefore their numbers have shrunk. And the contrast is the number of Persian-speaking Christians, the converts, who used to have some churches, established churches registered with the authorities before the Islamic Revolution and soon after the revolution. But those churches have been shut down, especially since 2009, when we faced a new wave of persecution, denying the existence of indigenous Persian-speaking Christianity. And the government seemed determined to uproot this church because, of course, there's been much on the news about how many Iranians, perhaps disillusioned with the brand of Islam that this regime is promoting, or generally because of their exposure to the outside world and different realities, different options for their spirituality, they choose to become Zoroastrians, atheists, and quite a considerable number of them hear Christian message and despite the risks, convert to Christianity. So I think that gives the general picture, which I hope it is helpful.
And my understanding is for Farsi speakers, there is no church where a Farsi Christian can actually attend. It's mostly house churches, small groups. It's media that is resourcing the church.
Until a few years ago, there was a couple of dozen churches offering Persian services. It started since the missionary movement about a couple of 100 years ago, but then gradually grew, particularly Presbyterians and Anglicans, later on Brethren and other Protestant denominations. But they were one after the other closed down, and there are only 3 remaining churches right now offering services in Farsi, but they are restricted. So the access is not for anybody else except the very aging congregation, which combined all 3 churches is not even 100 people. Those are protected because they're of the Anglican denomination, and therefore there's diplomatic issues there.
So this closing of churches and persecution really started within weeks of the Islamic Revolution in 1979 and continues today. And out of that has come your advocacy for Christians in your country, Article 18. You're the right person to have because you're the founder, CEO. What is Article 18 for our podcast listeners, and then we'll see how, ways that our podcast listeners can be a part of it.
Sure. Actually, the name of the organization is an invitation for a question. What is Article 18? It's an odd name to be chosen for an organization, and it has educational purpose. And we realize that many people are uninformed or ill-informed about their rights, including their right to religious freedom. And Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, 2 important human rights documents acknowledged by many countries who are members of the United Nations, including Iran, that has accepted and ratified this and has the obligation to adhere to its contents. Article 18 of these 2 documents guarantees the rights of every individual to freedom of religion or belief. That means the states should not impose on its population to choose or not to choose a religion. They can change it, they can express it, they can teach it to their future generations. But the name is chosen because we want to demonstrate how Iran violates this international law, which they're supposed to comply with. This, to us, is more of a pastoral care for the church. For many years, I'm a pastor at heart, so for many years, training, theological education and pastoral care, teaching and preaching was my calling. But then in addition to making God known to people, you face that these people who I care, who I have been entrusted for not only their spiritual, but also their social and mental, psychological care, are greatly under pressure because of the persecution. Many of my brothers and sisters are arrested, put in prison, and even facing charges of long imprisonment and death. I can't just remain silent and resort to prayer, which is a powerful mean to change, to bring about change, but not the only option. So to couple that prayer with some action, we started an initiative that turned out to be an organization. It grew not by design, but by default to what it is now. So it's basically an extension of pastoral care as well as the prophetic voice of the church.
I know I was on your website and reading so many different articles. I encourage our podcast listeners to visit your website, Article 18. It's all spelled out, article18.com. and read some of the articles. And I was reading one, The Plight of Iranian Christians Claiming International Protection in Turkey. And we think of the challenge for Christians just in the country, but once they get asylum or refugee status and move out, there's still a challenge and difficulty, and you're an advocate for them as well. So it's not only within the country, but also on their journey to another place where they have tremendous challenges as well.
Absolutely. And we do realize that an organization cannot do the work of a church, but we can just assist the church to do what they're supposed to. So what we do is to do the research and providing an overview and analysis of what is actually happening, what are the main priorities that we need to be concerned with. We can't remain indifferent to their needs, even though they're fled supposedly to a safe country, but they're in transition. So they actually, many of them have expressed their feeling as an open prison being in a country like Turkey. And this is surprising to us because many of us go on holiday to these destinations and we have a good time. But then how could this be an open prison? And then they would describe their challenge as they realize it is the cause of a serious trauma.
So I encourage our listeners to check out your website, read the articles, read some of your letters from prison, and really understand the plight of our brothers and sisters in the country of Iran, also on their journey to other countries. You're the chairman of the board of Sat7 Pars, one of Sat7's satellite TV channels in Farsi for Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. How does media, Sat7 Pars channel, how does that help you in your work as a pastor to your people as well as an advocate for your people?
Well, not just us, but being a voice for greater freedom that is denied of a religious minority that is being oppressed and their views have been silenced. I think Sat7 and any Christian channel has a role that as a platform can proclaim the truth amidst the censorship and propaganda. So by offering an alternative view, contrasting the misinformation spread by the Islamic government of Iran, it can provide not only the Christians, but general population about accurate and reliable information. So Christians are not portrayed in very negative light, but they can see what we are actually for. So that's one. Then it's also about giving hope to Christians that are facing despair. Is it all about persecution? Is it all about this negative news that comes out of Iran? No, there are things that positive programming from satellite television like Sat7 can uplift their spirit, reinforce their beliefs, and help them to realize that they're not alone in this struggle. And therefore, kind of foster a sense of solidarity and perseverance. They realize it's much bigger than us. There are many other brothers and sisters around the world that do suffer. There are many others who are praying and doing everything in their power to bring about positive change. Also, I think it's important, and I'm glad to see this development in the Sat7 in recent years, that they use this platform for educational purposes, promoting human rights and advocating for the rights of religious minorities, including Christians. But you cannot deny this very hard reality. It's like an elephant in a room. You have to speak about human rights. You can't only talk about otherworldly salvation. So let's be forgiven from our sins and reconcile with God and hope for the best. But there are things that we can do for our neighbor, nurse their wounds, take care of them. And that means your own church, but also those strangers in our community. And that means if you extend that to general population, it's about human rights. In a country that consistently being on the list of countries that violates human rights, we need to be speaking up about it as a church. So therefore, Sat7 can be a beacon of hope and truth and learning for many of his listeners and viewers.
I appreciate your leadership and your perspective here and articulating how the church and all of us can come alongside what you're doing. As you think about advocacy, what are some ways that our podcast listeners could come alongside what you're doing for your people in the country?
Well, we have a few things to engage the church, to allow them to see their role. We have something called adopt a prisoner and adopt a refugee. So we ask churches to go on the website, find we have a page for adopt a prisoner, where they can find one of these people who have been incarcerated because of their faith or Christian activities. And they're serving 2, 5, 10, whatever many years in prison. And just in their worship time, maybe monthly, maybe weekly, whatever they can, to pray for these people. And and keep us accountable to offer them updates on the situation of these people. What it does is when we are informed that the church with, 20 prayer warriors or 200 or 2,000 are praying for this person, we just pass on this message to the prisoners. And you cannot imagine how positive impact it has on them to endure, to realize that they're not alone. Later, we don't ask for their donations or whatever, but we ask for their participation in whatever activities that is needed for the release of these brothers and sisters from prison. Say, for instance, an opportunity comes up and they need to sign a petition for asking for their release, and they would be informed that they can take part. So that's the part of the thing that it allows the church to be engaged. But we all have government representative people that are influencers. They can somehow influence change. It could be a person of high office within the religious community that we can write to and ask, can you intervene, please? Use whatever your connections, your networks, and bring about the release of this brother or sister. They've been unfairly tried and sentenced and now serving prison sentences for what is their legal right. So there are plenty of opportunities. They can get in touch with us. We love to connect with churches if we can, online or in person, to join their worship services and speak to their congregation to see what we can do together to change.
If you're listening to this, I encourage you to forward this on to your church and ask them to look at that page, Adopt a Prisoner, and then rally support and prayer for that individual and their incarceration. And if you're on committees, forward this to your committees, get the word out. Again, check out Article18.com and go through different buttons there and pages and articles. There's a lot that you can learn about the country, about the church, about what's happening. And so I encourage you to listen. So Mansour, this is fascinating to hear you talk about your people, your church there in Iran. And thank you for joining the Unconventional Ministry Podcast to update us, to correct our misunderstandings, and to give us an update on the situation. So thank you for joining us.
It's been a great honor. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast.
In our changing world, there are more ways than ever to do ministry. Sat7 as a broadcast media ministry is changing how ministry is done. Through innovative approaches, collaborative efforts, broadcast satellite television, web streaming, and social media, Sat7 is making a difference. Visit Sat7 online today at sat7usa.org to learn ways you can be a part of this kingdom work. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your friends. If you know of an unconventional ministry approach, please introduce us. We'd like to have them on as guests. Thank you again for joining this episode of the Unconventional Ministry Podcast.